So this Financial Times heading, trapped on British farms. This is misleading because it's true. The first word is true, trapped. But it's not accurately related to where it is applicable. So instead of saying trapped on British farms, that headline or heading should be trapped in Britain. And this is the trap that they are actually kind of focusing on the firms, and they're not really discussing most of the people who came into the UK for economic reasons, migrants or immigrants. Most of the people that have come from Africa and Asia, they've left out all these people from there that discuss this full-page Financial Times report byline to Sarah O'Connor and Judith Evans. And they talk about the hardship and the low pay and other kind of denial of basic rights suffered by mainly migrant workers from Europe. And they're talking about the shortages of British-born indigenous workers in these farms and for these farms. But they're not putting all the various factors together. Therefore, this piece is factually true, but it's not contextual. It's out of context and it's not really coherent in terms of analysis. And there is no reference to racism, and there is no actual acknowledgement of the racism. Now, I'm going to refer to the migration that has happened for the last good number of years, 70 years, let's say, 75 years. And I'm dating this from the August 1947, when the British Empire formally ended in the subcontinent. Of course, people had been migrating and immigrating to the what was stupidly and completely shamelessly paraded as the motherland. How could Britain be the motherland for Asian and African people? But it was portrayed to the colonized people in the subcontinent and in Africa as the motherland. And of course, in the Caribbean islands. I mean, compared to the masses of people, the huge numbers of people in Asia and Africa, the Caribbean population is completely insignificant in terms of the number. But in terms of the experience, in terms of the deprivation of rights, I mean, the people from the Caribbean have been suffering the same kind of deprivations and denials and robberies of their rights as the people from the main populations in Asia and Africa. Now, I have discussed before the creation of these areas with a heavy concentration of African and Asian people. Not all of England is populated by African and Asian people. It's places like Brick Lane in London, Southall in Ealing, West London, in Bradford in Yorkshire, Birmingham, of course, in the Midlands, and Bristol partly from the African origin people, African legacy people, and Cardiff to an extent, and of course London. So these places, London, for example, in the context of the Bangladeshis, London has been home for a very small number, but actually kind of continuously present population from the Silot area. It goes back to more than 100 years. And I have had relations, not immediate relations, but relations who have been in London for more than 100 years, or for more than 100 years ago, they arrived in London. So when I was growing up, when I became aware of the conversations, I was able to relate to things like London, not necessarily things like the streets in London, but I was able to relate to London very early on in terms of it being a place or a country. I mean, it became being an image of a country at the initial stages of the conversation I overheard, and it became a place later on. So for my kind of understanding of London and UK and migration and racism, I actually can refer back to very early years of my life growing up. So even though I was physically not here in London, I had kind of earlier acquaintance with London than I had with some of the cities like Dhaka or other parts of the subcontinent in terms of the narrative. And the image of London that I was kind of able to hear discussed, referred to by the people that were visiting our house and having kind of political and similar discussions every day. The image of London that was being painted and portrayed and discussed in those discussions, it was almost without any exception, London was being discussed as an ideal place in terms of comparative prosperity and so on. Later on, I became party or privy to discussions that were happening in my hearing elsewhere, that America was a source of serious money that people from the Silot area were beginning to go to. London was the first one. It wasn't London so much as Bilat, England, and Bilat was the main kind of word that was being said. So Bilat was being replaced by Mirikin. They wouldn't say America, they would say Mirikin. So the Mirikin was replacing Bilat and London as the place for, well, Mirikin was at that stage being portrayed as the place from where people returned to Silot with extraordinary amounts of money. So all the references to England, Bilat, and America were references to do with money, and reference to do with the fact that those are the places where plentiful money was available to the lucky ones. And when the discussion was taking place in the village or villages, the image of Bilat and the image of Mirikin were images of almost kind of outer outer space places that didn't actually resemble anything that we were encountering in the bazaars and the markets, where haggling was commonplace and people were arguing over small kind of changes in terms of price. And so that was the background. And anyone, any chance to escape to Bilat or Mirikin would be readily kind of grabbed hold of, and the people would go. So this was the beginning, this was the working, this was the background over many years. And the build-up ended up in 1961-62, when I helped any number of people go to Bilat. So today's Financial Times doesn't have any resemblance to that reality. And the whole page by these two women reads like an out of this world experience that is not real, that is not, and it is the opposite of the El Dorado or the place of gold, land of gold, that Bilat and Mirikin were being portrayed as in the villages of Silot. And I think that this is one of the worst kind of offenses by Fleet Street. Because this whole article, very long article, as I say, big read, is full of facts, but they're not coordinated. And there is no synthesis, and there is no coherence, and there is no context. So if they stuff this newspaper with so much fact, without any analysis, any direction, any history, any context, then the facts don't amount to anything except filling space. And I think that this is true of almost every piece in Fleet Street, not in the Daily Mail or the Mail on Sunday or the scum that is the Sun or the Express, but in less kind of racist and less overtly stupid, ignorant titles like the Financial Times and the Guardian. The Guardian and the Financial Times are running more pieces showing up Brexit as a failure, which is factually true. It's not because they're doing it because of any campaign, they're not. And Vince Cable, the Lib Dems leader before the current one, was the architect of the slogan that Brexit, there was swearing word, Brexit. Vince Cable openly paraded anti-Brexit slogan. But today, he has posted something saying that Brexit has happened and we should move on. Now, Vince Cable, we captured him on video in 2009, October 2009. I filmed him in Bethnal Green. And I caught him on film as being stupid, literally stupid. So when I say the diagnosing the media, I'm diagnosing almost all the British politicians on the evidence, on the first-hand experience. And most of them are stupid. In fact, if Boris Johnson is a congenital liar, according to the French ambassador, who was in post in London as the ambassador of the French Republic for 4 to 5 years, then it goes without saying that there will be not anyone else who is intelligent to the point that there should be, to the level that there should be. Remember what I'm saying about Boris Johnson, because Johnson, has crafted his career by peddling the myth that he is cleverer than the ordinary average kind of Briton. But all the evidence show that he is not clever at all, that he is a liar, and he fakes his kind of guise as clever. And the scandal of his fiancée being in control of a faction in the running of the number 10 Downing Street, it's actually proof that Boris Johnson hasn't got the necessary abilities and skills. He's not fit for purpose. Because Kerry Simmons is not either elected, as her detractors have said, nor is she very experienced. And yet she has been running a counter kind of advisory unit to advise Boris Johnson, as opposed to his officially government-appointed group of advisors. That shows that Boris Johnson is not in control. So, when the Financial Times writes that one, and it turns out that it is ill-written, ill-presented, and ill kind of integrated, and not really coordinated, that shows that the role of the Fleet Street papers that were supposedly arguing the rational case against Brexit, that role didn't exist because it didn't register. And mainly because of the likes of the Financial Times in this article, say, for example, meandering around the issues and not coming forward straight away up front with the actual evidence of the corruption of Brexit, or the corrupt arguments of Brexiteers and by Brexiteers. And although at every stage, every point of Boris Johnson unfitness, somebody writes that, oh, we told you so, or we were not kind of impressed by his argument at the time, they're lying. Why? Because I'm telling you. Because I've been reading and I've been monitoring all of them, the all main ones. As I'm showing again by this detail, look at the one article in the Financial Times. I have now discussed it in 3 parts of this so far. One article. Two byliners, Sarah O'Connor and her colleague, O'Connor on the first one, and the Judith Evans, her colleague. This piece trapped on British farms. The trap is all over Britain. And Britain is a big trap for the migrants. That's what I was saying about these big concentrations. Brixton in Lambeth being the area where the Windrush generations and their kind of likes, if you like, similar people from similar backgrounds from the neighboring islands in the Caribbean Sea. The Brixton was the center of those people with those kinds of backgrounds. And Brick Lane was the place for the people from Sylhet. Now remember, Sylhet is not just a part of Bangladesh as in the district or the division of Sylhet. Sylhet is also parts of Assam in India. So Sylhet is bigger than what may appear at first. And when the Sylhetis arrived in the UK, they arrived mainly by the merchant ships. And they left the ships and they got on the shore and started living, because there was no need for any nationality checks or anything. They just left the ships. And that was part of the kind of attempt. The trend was being set to escape poverty. The poverty that the wages paid to them as seamen wasn't anywhere near good enough or anywhere near enough to send home to their relations. The families. So Mirikin and Bilat were destinations for people escaping poverty, even say 40 years before the actual employment voucher of the early 1960s enabled a large number of Silotis to come here. And I'm one of the people who sent any number of people under that scheme. Now, what I didn't do when I came here myself, for completely different reasons, which I shall explain in due course, I found that the Bangladeshis, or then East Pakistanis, or mostly East Pakistanis, had disintegrated as people. Although they were here and sending enough money to their families, as people, as society, as social beings, they didn't have any autonomy and they didn't have any organization of their own in terms of socially functioning connections. A fact that immediately compelled me to do whatever I could to form social organizations, again, which I shall elaborate on in detail in due course. So I became forced by the power of the evidence of absence of these necessary social connections and kind of foundations, to create the foundations and create the connections in a way that had never existed. In other words, I began starting to address the problems by addressing the British institutions. Whereas before I started doing any of that, the Bangladeshis were addressing one another. And they were addressing one another by relating to events back in Bangladesh or in East Pakistan or whenever. That was the difference. I created a revolution in addressing the British institutions for the ills of the Bangladeshis. Well, I'll talk about Deepak Nandi, and I will say that Deepak Nandi didn't do anything like what I did. Deepak Nandi's role was as an extension of the British kind of liberals. And he didn't actually look at the community inside. And he didn't come from Bangladesh anyway. Even if he didn't come from Bangladesh, he wasn't kind of barred or banned from entering the community, but he didn't. And what has happened in the last, let's say, 60 years since the employment vouchers, which I actually applied to send hundreds and hundreds to the UK in the early 1960s, is that in the last 60 years, people who are now the Bangladeshis in the UK or UK Bangladeshis have not kind of realized the many potentials to set up a community that is real, community structure that is real. And I'll explain this in detail. What I mean is that the tendency has been to behave as dependents of the white superiors. I mean, whites have been treated as superiors, as being superior in intelligence and his generosity and wisdom and outlook and all the other things. So the source of wisdom has been the white people. Like, for example, in Tower Hamlets, there was a man called Trevor Huddleston in Stepney. He was the Bishop of Stepney. Now, the majority of the Bangladeshis even now are Muslims. They're not Christians. And yet, Trevor Huddleston was the one who was picked up by the media and the others to speak as the advocate and representative of the Bangladeshi community. And if it wasn't Trevor Huddleston, it was for a period, short period, but it was for a period, a trade union man called Dan Jones. Now, Dan Jones is mentally kind of defunct now, but his racism isn't. Whenever he sees any anti-racist in the street, in Cable Street, when he's still used to doing the run in the morning, Dan Jones goes crazy. And he swears at the anti-racists. Because at that time in the morning, nobody is watching. He thinks. But he's wrong. And Dan Jones, in the early morning runs, is exhibiting symptoms of lunacy, racist intolerance that I accused him of long before he lost his kind of marbles. And others in the community, some of them kind of completely impressed by his white superiority, thought that I was intentionally trying to kind of slander and smear Dan Jones. I never had any intention to intentionally smear anybody on anything. I don't. But the power of the evidence is such. The power of the evidence is so consistent. The power of the evidence is so undeniably kind of repeating itself that whenever that evidence comes in front of me and I make use of that by citing that evidence and describing the person who is guilty of the racism as being racist, some observers may think that I was being intentionally kind of harsh on the target of my diagnostic analysis. For example, the current mayor in the name of Tower Hamlets, the John Biggs, was described by Dan Sabag in The Guardian in April 9, 2018 as the diminutive John Biggs. And I have used that phrase repeatedly many times. One as an independent observation by somebody who doesn't live in Tower Hamlets and has nothing to do with me, but found a significant feature of John Biggs's kind of profile as being diminutive. I extended that diminution to his mentality and his attitude, and I found that he was diminutive in his actual understanding of his duties. And he was diminutive in his lack of respect for the community, especially lack of respect for the likes of me, because he was afraid of being kind of condemned by comparison with me. So the fact that these people, all of them white people, including the Bengali lecturer, who is William Radici, Giles Radici, the ex-MP's brother. Now, Radici claims to be a Bengali scholar and a Tagore scholar. He is no such thing. He is a novice in the Bengali language and history and culture. But to the Bangladeshis, he is a giant. Now, that is a measure of the stupidity and the level of idiocy on the part of those Bangladeshis, that William Radici is being exaggerated and his image being exaggerated in the way that it is. So from From August 1947 to now, which is today is the 17th of March 2021. All that time, these things have been building up. And the migrants that the Financial Times says are trapped on the fields are not trapped on the fields. They're trapped on all over the place, and they're trapped mainly in their minds. And the trap in the mind has been set and manufactured and foisted by the racists like Dan Jones, like John Biggs, like William Radici, like Trevor Huddleston, and a whole number of their ilk. And at every stage, I have to untangle and dispose of that trap. That is the difference, factually, chapter and verse. So I shall be going through this more in future parts, this article, because it's a good guidance to understanding what is going on and what has been going on. And now we talk about generally the duty that has been owed to these children, these girls. Shamima Begum is the name that actually leads us to those other girls in terms of reference. And I mean, as I said, when we started the campaign for justice for the children that included Shamima Begum, we started that campaign within hours of the Supreme Court ruling against her on the 26th of February 2021. There was nobody, none in the media, no source in the media whatsoever that was saying anything good about the argument against the racist decision and the discriminatory denial of Shamima Begum's citizenship rights. As soon as we started the campaign, within 24 hours, little items began to appear. For the first time in the 6 calendar years, since February 2015, that showed likely sympathies for Shamima Begum. So we note that as directly resulting from our campaign, which is absolutely positive in terms of the recognition that has begun to appear. And we focus on the Tower Hamlets Council's negligence, illegality, criminality in not safeguarding these children during the, let's say, 10 years, starting from October 2010. Well, not 10 years, 5 years, say, up to February 2015. So 5 years. There were 10 years of age at the time, but 5 years from being 10 to 5, so 15 years of age. So for 5 years, these girls were owed the duty of care by or safeguarding by Tower Hamlets, the local council, their local council. And for 5 years, that local council betrayed them, neglected them, and in fact, allowed the derailment of these girls into whatever derailment continued from February 2015 up to now. So those 5 calendar years are the crucial years during which these girls could be safeguarded and saved from being derailed. That is the essence of our campaign about Shamima Begum, and we're demanding Tower Hamlets Council to account for that failure, not account for just by issuing a stupid excuse of a statement. No. Real accountability. which means that whoever was responsible must face prosecution, and multi-million pound fine and compensation they should be made to pay to these children. And Termless Council criminals must apologize to the whole country, Britain, saying that they contributors, the key contributors to Shamima Begum and the other girls being misled, was the Termless Council, not some kind of jihadi somewhere outside and some kind of mysterious Muslim radical. No, it was the Termless Council that made Shamima Begum fall in the wrong hands, or fall in with the wrong hands, and the other three girls. Think about the depth of what we're saying. So we are going to continue.